Hello and welcome everyone. Bienvenue. Welcome to our session on safeguarding the future of transition finance. So my name is Lindsey Walton and I serve as the Director of Americas for the Principles for Responsible Investment. So the Principles for Responsible Investment is the world's leading proponent in responsible investment. We are an investor-led organization with 5,300 investors globally signed up to the principles, representing 128 trillion in assets under management in USD. I am incredibly honored to be on this stage with three very senior leaders in this space. Leslie Samuelrich, President of Green Century Funds, Erin Bigley, Chief Responsibility Officer at AllianceBernstein, and Michelle Dunstan, Chief Responsibility Officer at Janus Henderson. So just to set the stage quickly before we go into some questions, a few days ago, the IEA released their World Energy Investment Report, which notes that capital flows to the energy sector are set to rise in 2025 to 3.3 trillion in USD, 2.2 trillion of which will go towards renewables, nuclear, grid storage, low emission fuels, and electrification. In this session, we will discuss how investors are thinking about this in the context of their individual investment decisions, as well as their broader portfolios and organizational outlook. Okay, let's get started with the basics. And I will use my left hand to open this piece of paper. Sorry. So, Michelle. Sustainable investments work is typically done via ESG integration as the baseline at the investment decision stage, and then add additional thematic alignment assessments for ESG funds, very important to get that difference during this conversation, I think, and ongoing monitoring and stewardship. So what do these practices look like in your organization? What are the key tools and processes you use, and how do you make investment decisions as a result?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. And I think what you said there is really important to clarify what we mean when we talk about different aspects of sustainable investing, or ESG. ESG is kind of a catch-all for a lot of different things, and it's created a lot of confusion. You see headlines in the paper that get things, quite frankly, wrong. So let me try and clarify a bit and then talk about what we do. And there is a distinction that I would make, and different people call it different things, but between what you mentioned, which is the baseline of ESG integration, and truly sustainable investing, or ESG-focused funds. ESG integration, frankly, I wish we just called it good investing. What it is if there's a financially material, environmental, social, or governance consideration, we should be treating it the same way we do any other financial consideration, which is incorporating it at each appropriate stage of the investment management process. It's not about an ESG objective. It's not about not investing in something because it's not good. It's about recognizing that there are risks and opportunities associated with ESG factors and incorporating them into your process. And the idea is that a better evaluation of risk and a better evaluation of return leads to better financial results for your clients. So when we think about it, we do have a three-pronged approach. The first is actually around corporate responsibility. If we were out there asking our companies to do things better or do things differently, our own practices should reflect what we expect of those companies. The second, ESG integration. We think this is part and parcel of how we produce financial returns for our company. Then we have our third category, was what we call the Janus Henderson Brighter Future Funds. These are ESG-focused strategies that have dual objectives, an ESG objective alongside that financial objective. But when we think about ESG integration, for us, we're a research house. You heard Ali Dabaj, our CEO, talk about it earlier. We have 350 analysts and portfolio managers around the world that are really digging into companies to understand them. We want to understand the impact on cash flows, on valuation, on cost of capital. And we do that by, first of all, identifying which environmental, social, and governance factors are material. That typically varies by sector. So, for instance, a mining company or an oil company, environmental, employee health and safety might be very critical to that company. But for a healthcare company, chances are they don't have a huge environmental footprint. But proper marketing practices, how you conduct your clinical trials, patient data security, those are all things that matter to a different set of companies. So what's material? probably for any given company, there's 4 or 5 things that are really going to send the price of that stock or that bond up or down. Again, research. And that's a partnership between our investment teams, the analysts and portfolio managers, and the subject matter experts on my team. How you do that research, how you forecast, how you build into your models what the impact is. And then there's engagement. So we engage for 2 reasons. We engage for insight, to understand all these different environmental, social, and governance factors and how the company is managing them, and then incorporate that in our investment process. And we also do engage for outcomes, where we like a company, but we think they may not be managing some of these sustainability risks appropriately. We will have a discussion with them about why we think these issues are critical to their financial success and what we think they should be doing at it. If you're integrating ESG at each of these stages, it's integrated into your decision. And for equities, also proxy voting. And again, it's not about exclusions. Frankly, widespread exclusions don't allow you to meet the risk-adjusted returns your clients are looking for. It's about the analysis. It's about understanding, integrating, and assessing the risks and opportunities out there to determine, hey, there aren't any. I'm going to invest. Maybe there are some risks, but the market is fully aware. I'm going to buy the stock or bond anyway. Or, I think there may be something here that the market is missing. Maybe I'm going to take a 50 basis point position instead of 100. Or in some rare circumstances, it might be, wow, the market is missing a really big risk. I don't want to invest. But we believe that ESG integration is just part and parcel of good investing.
Thank you so much. Erin and Leslie, anything to add?
So Michelle and I worked together for many years, and so it's so nice to sit here and say, I echo what she says. We think very, very like-mindedly. So I would just build on exactly what she said and say that to do that research today, you need the data and the technology to help your 300, 400 analysts make those decisions. And I think that over the past several years, you've seen the ability to gather more data on companies or countries and to pull that together into investment tools so that your teams can use those material factors as part of their investment processes. So one of the big investments that we've been making at AllianceBernstein is in our data as well as our technology tools. So we have a similar materiality map, and we're pulling in 180 plus data points on companies. And this is going beyond, 3 years ago, we would have been saying, okay, what are your carbon emissions? But we want to get more detailed. We want to understand what are your emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3? What kind of path are you on? But we want to get into the details by industry. And thankfully, with some of the information that you can either get from a company or scrape from their website or get from an NGO, you can understand industry-specific things like calculating emissions per seat mile for the airline industry, things like that. So I think data and technology is critical for responsible investing or ESG-related investing today. I also think customization is becoming really key. For those ESG-focused strategies that Michelle mentioned as her third pillar, we similarly build what we call portfolios with purpose, where you're investing with a specific ESG lens. But what I've been learning over the past several years is that very few clients want that same lens. And so I think that data and technology can also allow you to customize portfolios. What type of net zero target might you want in your portfolio? Maybe it's decarbonization, maybe it's solutions. And so I think that goes hand in hand with being able to deliver client solutions as well.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie Sandrich again from Green Century Funds, and we have a slightly different approach. We've been doing responsible investing for over 3 decades. And while we do, and my fellow panelists did an excellent job describing ESG integration, we use those tools as well, but we also still use screening. And the reason is that I have never found still an investor that comes to us from a values point of view and says, I'm really excited about ESG analysis because I think that will eliminate tobacco companies from our portfolio. It may, but it also may not. And so we serve clients who are principally values driven, so that they're coming to us for exclusions on tobacco or because they're particularly concerned about climate change and they just don't want to support fossil fuel companies. And so that is the first part of our investment strategy. We also have a three-pronged approach. The second part is shareholder advocacy. And we call it advocacy because we go beyond proxy voting. We vote all our proxies in-house according to our ESG criteria. We then engage with companies. And for us, disclosure is not sufficient. That is helpful to decide on the investments that you're making, but it doesn't move a company. And so, at least in the US, there's a process where shareholders can bring a shareholder resolution to the ballot if your dialogue with the company has not been successful. And so we utilize that tool every year when companies are just not willing to address the material risks that we think that they're facing adequately. So this year and last year, we have brought those resolutions forth to companies. Sometimes we get a withdrawal agreement and a policy goes into place, and then we follow up with those commitments. So for example, Mattel, we got many years ago to commit to reducing 25% of plastics from their packaging, which, as you know, is a concern on health and environmental issues. And so they have already gone 11% just 3 years into their pledge. So we follow up with them continually to make sure that they're on track to do that. And then the third is that we're different from other mutual funds in the US in that we're the only one that's owned by nonprofits. And that's where the impact also comes. So 100% of our net profits belong to those public health and nonprofit organizations. And last year we turned over $1 million to them to support clean energy, climate change, conservation, protection, and more.
Thank you so much. So it sounds like there's a huge menu of ESG or sustainable investments, but of course, just saying ESG investments is not synonymous with thematic. ESG investments most likely includes integration as a baseline, and that's appropriate for all investments because it's just good risk management to get the best risk-adjusted returns. Moving on to transition more specifically, what does a credible corporate transition plan look like? And what are the tools and frameworks that you use to assess this? And I'll start with you this time, Leslie.
Okay, thanks, Lindsey. We work with companies on their climate transition plans and have done so for several years. We used to focus on meeting SBTI goals. We've moved beyond that, though that's a good starting place. So we have a few pillars that we're looking for. One is that to how companies will operationalize their plans across all their business lines. We're also looking for a climate transition plan that is different than a corporate sustainability report. Just to pause on that, because a lot of times companies will go, well, here's our sustainability report, and we'll go, it's great that you're putting that out for investors and the public to know and other stakeholders to understand, but it is not moving the company necessarily toward a lower carbon emissions plan. So we're looking for both near-term and long-term goals that are quantitative and qualitative. We're also looking for companies and how they are mobilizing their capital to enact the plans, because otherwise it's just aspirational. There are, I think at the beginning of a lot of us working with companies, that companies were launching aspirational climate plans. We're going to go 100% something, 100% renewable without any actual roadmap. And the roadmap is actually very, very important. Also for us, it's important that the plans are public. It's not only that we as Green Century investors want to know, but we think all the stakeholders should know about the risks and how the company is addressing it. And then finally, we work with a few different frameworks. The Transition Plan Task Force, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, and Ceres. And all of these actually put out really good barometers and markers of a climate transition plan, but they're different and they build upon each other. And the reason that we use 3 of them is that we're working with different industries and different companies, and the companies need to have plans and roadmaps that are most suited to them.
Great. Move on to you, Erin and Michelle. Anything to add?
The only thing that I would add is we similarly use a framework, and we try to have consistency while taking into consideration industry specifics, as I was mentioning before. And I think what we try to do, and building on something that Michelle said, we will do an assessment, we will gather lots of data, we will try to understand, read their plans, understand that. But that's where I think engagement has to be the next jumping off point, because you are going to assess them on the numbers or the figures or what they've published. But then I think you really do need to have that engagement to understand who is governing this process, who is leading their decarbonization strategy or their transition strategy, and do I find them credible? Just as you would for good old-fashioned research, want to understand who is leading the company, who is governing the overall corporate strategy, and do I find them credible and good stewards of our capital? So engagement is a key part of managing those transition risks. AB.
I think I would echo what our other panelists have said. And there are a lot of commitments out there, but sometimes there's nothing behind those commitments. So it's not good enough just to look at an SBTI or any kind of commitment. And there's companies who haven't made commitments that actually have reasonable transition plans. So that's where the data and the research and the engagement come in. Like these others, we have our own credible transition assessment, which is built into our data tool called ESG Explore. It covers the 4 A's. Ambition, what are you trying to do? Actions, are you actually putting your money where your mouth is? What kind of CapEx and other things are you spending to actually achieve a transition? It covers accountability. Are there goals? Is it built into people's compensation, particularly C-suite, and actual achievements? And then again, what you can do with this is, one, it helps our clients who have net zero ambitions actually achieve those, but it also directs the research and those engagements. You can look at a portfolio, sort, say, on carbon emissions, and see if you've engaged with a company and where they are in this assessment tool, and that helps direct where you're going to spend your time. Your highest emitters that don't score well on the assessment tool, to first of all understand, are they actually doing something that's not particularly public? And if they're not, try and show them that this is something you care about. This is something you think will eventually impact their market share or costs, and why you think there's a business reason for them to actually have a credible transition plan.
And if I can, I was just going to add that even though in the U.S. the climate disclosure rule will not be defended and companies are not going to be required now to look at scope 3 emissions, for many industries that is where the majority of their emissions lie. So we also are not just looking at scope 1 and 2, but really looking into the supply chains, looking for scope 3. And so for some companies already started down that path. We worked with Costco and many others to establish those kind of goals. And so the follow-up to that is important, especially in the U.S. right now, when the regulatory frameworks and rules that we're all hoping would come into place are not going to be there. And so it's up to us as investors to work with those companies and follow up with them, whether it is their sourcing of more renewable energy, it's energy conservation. There's many different paths to go and achieve your goals on the climate transition plans.
Absolutely, and just a note from our PRI signatories, we hear very regularly that regardless of what the SEC is doing, regardless of what the CSA is doing, investors need disclosures. So it will have to happen, whether it's mandatory or whether it's through the investor corporate dialogue. Just a small follow-up to that, and I think all of you mentioned CapEx, which is great, because every time and I'm sure you look at the Climate Action 100 plus benchmarks, the Climate Engagement Canada benchmarks, which is our initiative that's akin to Climate Action 100, the place where companies fall down is the allocation or the alignment of capital allocation as well as lobbying alignment. So are those two the really key factors? Like, is that the rub you find when you're talking to companies about their plans?
Who did you want to start? Anyone?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'll start. It is important because otherwise, again, it's just aspirational. It's something that's on the page, and if there's no money behind it, it's just not going to happen. A lot of the environmental and sustainable goals that people and companies are looking to achieve do require resource allocation. Sometimes it can be recouped over time, but you can't just will the things to happen. As all of you know, in your own businesses. And so those expenditures are really important. and also looking at how their political activities are aligning with their goals. And so we're looking also for that political disclosure around their lobbying and their trade associations, because while a company may have the policies in place that are going to reduce their material risks, they also might be part of a trade association that is not representing their goals and ambitions. And then that's a conflict. So policies can either encourage companies and support them in their work to reduce carbon emissions, or can thwart it. And so we're looking also to uncover those friction points, so that obviously to make companies aware, but also to encourage action on their part to either sway that trade association, and if after many, many years of effort that doesn't work, to consider leaving that trade association if it's really working against the goals and aspirations of the company.
Anything to add?
I would just pick up on the CapEx point briefly. We would love to see CapEx that's clearly labeled, this is our energy transition CapEx, and you don't often get it labeled as such or disclosed as such. But coming back to the engagement with companies point, you can often learn a lot and understand where some CapEx might be going towards transition-related activities. We were talking to a company that's involved in water services. They're trying to help their companies reduce water usage, which we think is very aligned with the transition. Water is expensive to move, it's expensive to clean. And so by understanding their strategy around water services, and what they're spending on that, we can think about, oh, okay, so this is part of their CapEx on energy transition, even though they're not labeling it as such or disclosing it as such. So you can piece together that mosaic if you're engaging with company management.
Yeah, and like we said, you need that commitment. You need to understand what a company is doing to actually achieve their plans. That ambition is not enough. And CapEx is one indication. But the plan for every company, and particularly every industry, is going to be a bit unique. So it may not be so much CapEx as OpEx for some companies, but it's understanding what they're trying to do, and are they allocating the appropriate resources behind that to actually accomplish it. That can't be seen from looking at one piece of data on a piece of paper. It has to be done through the research and engagement that we've been talking about.
Great. So I love to hear that backed up from around the results that we see in those benchmarks. Moving on to a slightly different topic, meaningful engagement and partnerships with Indigenous peoples who are at the forefront of this transition, of course, are crucial for the success of this once-in-a-lifetime economic shift. So how do you discuss topics like FPIC, free prior informed consent, and participation of local communities with potential or current investees? And I'll start with you, Erin.
Thanks. As we were talking about this, it made me think of a piece we just published around water risks. And water risk is a big topic. CDP estimates that 69% of listed equities face some sort of water risk that could be costing hundreds of billions of dollars. And when we face those big risks like water, we like to develop frameworks to think about how are our companies handling these risks, because they are very material. You see them in a number of different industries, but mining, semiconductors, food and beverage, and these can be super costly. So in particularly managing relations with Indigenous peoples and communities around water can be very important. And if you do it poorly, it can be very costly. So for example, mining companies who are not appreciating the risks, the pollution that they're bringing to areas of high biodiversity. You've seen mining companies lose $10 billion having to shut down operations in a place like Panama, or a food and beverage company not getting the water permits to launch that extra brewery that they wanted to start that cost them over $600 million. This is real money that can be lost if you are not engaging with communities. Those water permits were not permitted because they did not engage with the communities, and the communities protested. So what do we want to see? When we think about risks like that, engaging with Indigenous peoples, engaging with communities is a key part of our engagement framework. We want to understand, how are you managing stakeholders? Have you mapped out the areas within which you're operating? And do you understand which communities are where? And do you understand that communities are often very heterogeneous in nature, and you need to engage with many different local stakeholders potentially? And then, who is overseeing this? Do you have both top-down and bottom-up expertise in that engagement and stakeholder communication and community communication? Do you have local expertise on site? But then is it also important all the way up the chain of your firm, from project managers to regional senior vice presidents, to your sustainability officer, and ultimately to the C-suite that governs the company? And so we want to be asking the questions: have you done that mapping? Do we see that engaging with Indigenous peoples is important to you? One of the case studies that we've seen that is a success story turned from a failure, there's a Canadian mining company that operates out west and had is really exhibiting best practices today, but after an unfortunate incident a decade ago where there was leakage from the mine into the surrounding watershed, and the local communities understandably were incredibly up in arms and upset about that. They changed their policies, instituted policies, began to engage with the local chief in this case, and really instituted policies and procedures to make community engagement part and parcel of their everyday processes. Fast forward, they've now entered into 100 different agreements with Indigenous communities within which they operate. That was only 5 in the decade prior to this incident. So we like to see those sorts of examples, and that's the type of engagement that we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Erin, and as a former mining analyst and portfolio manager for commodity equities, I've dealt with a lot of these incidents. And what I would say is, in that communication, it is clearly talking with the C-suite of these companies about why this is important. And it's not just important because we care about the local communities. It's actually important to these companies as a business. So what Erin was talking about is absolutely true. If you're thinking about some of these companies, Barrick, Canadian miner, mine on the border of Argentina and Chile, they spent $6 billion on a mine that never actually operated, never produced an ounce of gold, because they had poor relations with the local communities, and the communities were concerned about the glaciers and the runoff from that. First Quantum, another Canadian miner company, that's the mine in Panama that we're talking about here. These, if you're not managing your local communities correctly, and by say managing, I mean that is treating them as individuals with unique needs, where if you are taking resources from the land, you need to take into consideration what you're taking from them to give back to the community, to not damage the local water tables, the prospect for agriculture, but also to think about a sustainable long-term community in terms of infrastructure, in terms of access to healthcare and education. Initially, there's a lot of jobs when you build a mine, but when that mine's operating, there's very few jobs after that. So best practice, again, is to build industry locally. We've seen alpaca farms in the Andes. We've seen setting up factories to produce the safety gear and equipment used at the mine, but also being distributed around the countries. And if you don't do this, you risk not getting your permit. You risk expropriation. You risk being shut down. So it is clearly communicating to the company management that what you're talking about isn't just because you care deeply about it and it's a nice to have. It's actually necessary to preserve your social license to operate and to be able to obtain the value from these assets that you thought when you were expecting the CapEx to start with.
Thank you. Very, very important. We've seen a lot of investors derive huge benefits from economic participation with Indigenous nations in Canada and beyond. So thank you for that. I'm going to go to a zoomed out question, looking at the bigger picture. The energy transition will, of course, require massive amounts of investment flows from the global north to the global south. So how is your organization thinking about this? Quite a broad question, and I'll start with you, Erin.
Okay, well, there is no transition without the global south, because even if you're investing in the developed world, you've got supply chains that will be spanning the entire globe, including the global south. We've done a lot here. There's a lot more to do. One of the best examples that we've seen of really great financing in emerging markets for the transition has been in Chile. Chile has been advanced. We have seen sovereign bonds from Chile, one of the few sovereign sustainability-linked bonds where they are committing to projects for decarbonization, and if they don't hit their targets, our bond coupon goes up. That's a really interesting structure. We also worked in that country to help to bridge financing and keep consumer utility costs low while allowing the utilities to actually shift from coal into renewables. And so we finance that bridge, and it allows them to not jack up the prices for the Chilean consumer who can't afford it. But I'm asking my team all the time, why can't we do more of this? And Chile is a bit unique. They are a net fossil fuel importer, and so they have an incentive to move to renewables. It is harder in those countries in the global south where they have ample fossil fuel related resources. That said, we've seen a lot of interesting blended finance deals, more of them around nature, where you had Ecuador needed to refinance its debt. We saw a really interesting public-private partnership, buy side coming together, guarantees from a US agency. It took the bond rating, which in Ecuador would be CCC, up to a AA. Some of the financing was dedicated to conserving the Galapagos Islands. Really interesting structure where everybody wins. Ecuador gets financing, we get a really interesting coupon and a high quality bond, and the Galapagos gets conservation. But they take years to structure sometimes, if not many, many months. So we are trying to get involved and host conferences to bring these players together to start greasing the wheels, but it takes time. They're not standardized, and when something's not standardized, it takes a lot longer to pull together.
Great. Michelle, anything to add?
No, Erin's absolutely right, but we do need the South involved, and we need to recognize that the South needs to be involved from a number of perspectives. One, there's a lot of people there that contribute towards an energy transition, but two, a lot of developing economies are based on coal. And we need to change that. But a lot of these economies don't have the either access to cheaper renewable fuels or the capex to actually invest. So that's why what Erin's saying is extremely important. There needs to be incremental investment to enable an energy transition in the developing world without sacrificing the pace of GDP growth or the living standard in those areas. So it's hard to combine those two without incremental finance.
I would just add, I don't have that much to add. It is very, very
Hard to go
important.
last.
Yeah, it is very, very important. I am concerned from the U.S. policy point of view and what the rollback in the U.S. of support of renewable energy and the support of fossil fuels will do. Maybe it will open up new opportunities. I don't really know, but it's not a good place for the U.S. to be on this. But we're hoping that there are more initiatives in the global South.
Thank you so much for that. And just a little plug for the PRI in-person conference in Sao Paulo. If you're interested in discussing this further, please check that out. It's a week before COP in Belém. All right, thank you so much for this. I'm going to just quickly sum up some points we heard. We heard that there's, of course, a differentiation between ESG funds and fund flows and what just regular old responsible investment is, which is including factors that are material, financially material to your investments, whether they be ESG or traditional finance factors. In looking at transition plans, they can't be just aspirational anymore. They must have the right capital allocation, operational allocation aligned to your plans. Make sure that you're lobbying in line with what you're saying publicly. And then lastly, in terms of collaboration with Indigenous communities, local communities, and bringing capital from the global north to the global south, it requires innovative ways of working, non-standardized conversations. So you have to really be in those communities, having these discussions to be able to work out a plan that is best for everyone. I am going to turn it over now to City of Toronto Councillor Shelley Carroll, who will give us some closing remarks.
Good morning. That was a quick introduction. I was hanging behind the divider listening, and then all of a sudden it was, oh, time to go on. Thank you. Leslie, I now understand why I've been asked to give closing remarks. Thank you, or Lindsey, I should say. Leslie, Erin, Michelle, thank you so much for your conversation. I think the reason I'm here as a city councillor is because we've talked so much about what your investment firms are looking for, and cities are one of the big things that people want to invest in. We're certainly an issuer of green bonds in Toronto, and so the IEFA asked me to deliver some closing remarks and give a picture of what's happening on the city side as the entity invested in, and it certainly is it certainly is gratifying to hear the considerations that your investor clients have, and to know that municipalities in Canada are going there, perhaps faster than anywhere else. So we're very worried about our own economies, and yet we are as full of potential as large and SME companies and investors in Canada. And so I think there's an opportunity here. ESG principles are something that come a little more naturally to municipalities because the pressure has been on us for a long time. It is for you, your investor clients, but also those companies that are looking for places to invest their dollars to attract talent now. There is no question that the young people entering some of these companies, they look to make sure that the ESG pillar inside the large companies and certainly financial companies, that they are planning on investing in putting their career there, because they're much more portable than we were in our days, and so they're looking to make sure that that pillar is real, that you really mean it when you say that ESG is a key consideration for the board in that company. They actually test it out. This is what we're hearing from the young people in Toronto. And so, you know, we plan, we build, and when we make our own investments, we make them on that basis. Toronto is a city of 3 million now, but the Greater Toronto area is 7.5 million now. We're ahead of schedule on the growth that was projected for us, and even though this year may have a different picture of growth, we believe that steadily that momentum is going to continue to build. And what it means is we have to model. We have to model for the rest of the company what a municipality can bring to the table, because we have the ability to do it a little before all the others. At 3 million, Toronto is larger than Montreal by the entire size of Vancouver. And so we have to be outliers. We have to do what we know every other municipality will need to do, so that we can show the way. And while that sometimes carries a little risk, we just we have to do as we do that. So we do, at a $59 billion 10-year capital plan, we know that if we're putting the climate lens on that, if we're using all of the vehicles in which we deliver social services, social program, if we're using those as the demonstration model areas in which we can apply those lenses when we're building capital and when we're attracting investment of our own, we know that that in and of itself is going to mean that our capital program, when we issue a bond, it can be a green bond. And so putting that lens on there just makes you more attractive in the market for people looking for green investment. And so we do that wherever we can. There's a transit equity lens on transit. That's transit expansion, and that's a no-brainer, and that comes as no surprise to you. But we also have an equity lens and an environmental lens on transportation right-of-way planning, and that in that we were first, but you are seeing it across the country happen, because we started a little thing back in the 80s called the Toronto Atmospheric Fund. It's completely arm's length from the city. If you invest in it, you're not investing in the city at all. It's completely arm's length to the city and protected in such by a piece of provincial legislation. We can't hide money over there and then pull it back later. It's a fund that exists completely on its own. And so that was the precursor to the Green Municipal Fund, which has led to municipalities across Canada adding that lens. And the Toronto Atmospheric Fund also has gone national. And so it went from being a tiny little endowment of 23 million, and that was sort of a natural consequence. We were selling our last nearby landfill, and we hived off 25 million of that and said, let's start this fund and begin to experiment with what can be done. At that time, we called it reducing pollution, and it expanded its mandate to reduce emissions. So that gives us a place where the financial sector in Toronto can send people to learn green investing, because we went from demonstrating ways to reduce climate change to now we more or less know those ways. With certain innovations, we can enhance them. But it means that rather than just putting out grants to find ways to reduce emissions, we can do direct investing in the models we know work and actually fill out a pro forma. And so many of our financial sector in the city will send people as they move up into upper middle management and then beyond, from E&Y, from KPMG, from the big five banks. We'll send people to sit on our direct investment board. So with a small fund, 25 million locally, 100 million if we want to do projects across the country, it's a small fund in which they can play and see what works and build the expertise that they need to take back to their corporations. And so we do that sort of all day long through Toronto Atmospheric Fund, but they also partner in with the city to make sure that we are keeping pace with the innovation. And as we go out to market with a capital tender, that we've thought of everything that can keep that lens on it, the green lens, the equity lens, et cetera. Our carbon accountability system in our Transform TO climate change plan ensures that this work is not only measurable, but transparent. You'll see a report later this year. Every year, we transparently release the inventory, and Council does a great debate on it, in which each year I watch one more councillor actually sort of begin to internalize what Transform TO is and how deep the plan runs. So that strengthens our position as a municipal leader in climate governance as well. We're also using public procurement to drive innovation. We're moving now to try and support clean tech adoption. Very energetic on that front, because in Canada there is a moment right now. There is a moment in which we can innovate. We were just talking about this in our roundtable discussion in the lounge, but it really belongs in this big room. The world of work is shrinking. We aren't going to have the baby boomer labor pool. We're going to have the current generation labor pools, slightly smaller. And so if we're growing, but we have that talent pool, one of the best talent pools in the world, but it's not the same talent pool we had in the 70s. But what we know is that we can go right ahead. Don't miss this moment. We can add clean tech adoption, AI innovation to all of these processes and execution of all these projects, because it's not about removing humans from the equation. It's going to be about making each of those humans better at what they do and more effective at what they do and able to do more, because we will need them to do more. And so the only risk now is the risk in missing out in being able to achieve that. And so we are moving very quickly to do that. You'll hear more of it when IEFA moves to Toronto in the fall. We hope that it will be a continuation of this discussion, and we'll be able to flesh out more for you how we're pushing on clean tech adoption and AI adoption in the public sector. Because as startups and firms arrive, who can be their biggest and most successful client? The thing that will take the medium size to the medium size to the large, it will be public sector clients. Having clients in the health system, having the 10 major municipalities in the system as your client. That's what's going to grow companies who want to set up in Canada. So we have a role in the public sector to be one of the best places for all of these amazing firms, clients, to be able to invest. So what I can tell you today, to wrap it all up, is that is very much the focus of Canada's largest municipality. And through the work that we do when we associate at FCM and through the Green Municipal Fund, it's spreading out across the country. We can realize this opportunity. And we'll follow on the rule, rather than compete with one another, we'll follow on the rule of Bill C5, one Canada, one economy. We all need to be doing these things for investors' sake, if not any others. Thank you very much. And thank you for the panel discussion. Yeah.